A few weeks ago, I decided to start making a series of videos called Why I Read, about the value of classic literature. Then school started, and I got a little busy teaching students the value of classic literature. But now I'm back. I'm back to share not my thoughts about why you should read classic literature, but Arnold Bennett's, because I just got this book in the mail, and first of all, it smells delicious. It's called Literary Taste: How to Form It, with detailed instructions for collecting a complete library of English literature. I started reading it and I absolutely devoured the first chapter. I don't know that I've ever read something that I felt a more immediate kindred spirit connection with the author than I did with this one. So I decided I had to share it with you. I'm just going to read straight from the book, the first chapter, which is called The Aim. At the beginning, a misconception must be removed from the path. Many people, if not most, look on literary taste as an elegant accomplishment by acquiring which they will complete themselves and make themselves finally fit as members of a correct society. They are secretly ashamed of their ignorance of literature in the same way as they would be ashamed of their ignorance of etiquette at a high entertainment, or of their inability to ride a horse if suddenly called upon to do so. There are certain things that a man ought to know, or to know about, and literature is one of them. Such is their idea. They have learnt to dress themselves with propriety and to behave with propriety on all occasions. They are fairly up in the question of the day. By industry and enterprise, they are succeeding in their vocations. It behooves them, then, not to forget that an acquaintance with literature is an indispensable part of a self-respecting man's personal baggage. Painting doesn't matter. Music doesn't matter very much, but everyone is supposed to know about literature. Then, literature is such a charming distraction. Literary taste thus serves two purposes: as a certificate of correct culture and as a private pastime. A young professor of mathematics, immense at mathematics and games, dangerous at chess, capable of Haydn on the violin, once said to me after listening to some chat on books, "Yes, I must take up literature," as though saying, "I was rather forgetting literature. However, I've polished off all these other things. I'll have a shy at literature now." This attitude, or any attitude which resembles it, is wrong. To him who really comprehends what literature is and what the function of literature is, this attitude is simply ludicrous. It is also fatal to the formation of literary taste. People who regard literary taste simply as an accomplishment and literature simply as a distraction will never truly succeed either in acquiring the accomplishment or in using it half acquired as a distraction. Though the one is the most perfect of distractions, and though the other is unsurpassed by any other accomplishment in elegance or in power to impress the universal snobbery of civilized mankind. Literature, instead of being an accessory, is the fundamental sine qua non of complete living. I'm extremely anxious to avoid rhetorical exaggerations. I do not think I am guilty of one in asserting that he who has not been presented to the freedom of literature has not wakened up out of his prenatal sleep. He is merely not born. He can't see, he can't hear, he can't feel in any full sense. He can only eat his dinner. What more than anything else annoys people who know the true function of literature and have profited thereby is the spectacle of so many thousands of individuals going about under the delusion that they are alive, when, as a fact, they are no nearer being alive than a bear in winter. I will tell you what literature is. No, I only wish I could, but I can't. No one can. Gleams can be thrown on the secret, inklings given, but no more. I will try to give you an inkling, and to do so, I will take you back into your own history or forward into it. That evening when you went for a walk with your faithful friend, the friend from whom you hid nothing, or almost nothing, you were, in truth, somewhat inclined to hide from him the particular matter which monopolized your mind that evening. But somehow you contrived to get onto it, drawn by an overpowering fascination. And as your faithful friend was sympathetic and discreet, and flattered you by a respectful curiosity, you proceeded further and further into the said matter, growing more and more confidential, until at last you cried out in a terrific whisper, "My boy, she is simply miraculous." At that moment, you were in the domain of literature. Let me explain. Of course, in the ordinary acceptation of the word, she was not miraculous. Your faithful friend had never noticed that she was miraculous, nor had about 40,000 other fairly keen observers. She was just a girl. Troy had not been burnt for her. A girl cannot be called a miracle. If a girl is to be called a miracle, then you might call pretty nearly anything a miracle. That is just it. You might, you can, you ought. Amid all the miracles of the universe, you had just wakened up to one. You were full of your discovery. You were under a divine impulsion to impart that discovery. You had a strong sense of the marvelous beauty of something, and you had to share it. You were in a passion about something, and you had to vent yourself on somebody. You were drawn towards the whole of the rest of the human race. Mark the effect of your mood and utterance on your faithful friend. He knew that she was not a miracle. No other person could have made him believe that she was a miracle. But you, by the force and sincerity of your own vision of her, and by the fervor of your desire to make him participate in your vision, did for quite a long time cause him to feel that he had been blind to the miracle of that girl. You were producing literature. You were alive. Your eyes were unlidded, your ears were unstopped to some part of the beauty and the strangeness of the world, and a strong instinct within you forced you to tell someone. It was not enough for you that you saw and heard. Others had to see and hear. Others had to be wakened up, and they were. It is quite possible, I'm not quite sure, that your faithful friend the very next day or the next month looked at some other girl and suddenly saw that she too was miraculous. The influence of literature. The makers of literature are those who have seen and felt the miraculous interestingness of the universe. And the greatest makers of literature are those whose vision has been the widest and whose feeling has been the most intense. Your own fragment of insight was accidental and perhaps temporary. Their lives are one long ecstasy of denying that the world is a dull place. Is it nothing to you to learn to understand that the world is not a dull place? Is it nothing to you to be led out of the tunnel onto the hillside, to have all your senses quickened, to be invigorated by the true savor of life, to feel your heart beating under that correct necktie of yours? These makers of literature render you their equals. The aim of literary study is not to amuse the hours of leisure. It is to awake oneself. It is to be alive, to intensify one's capacity for pleasure, for sympathy, and for comprehension. It is not to affect 1 hour, but 24 hours. It is to change utterly one's relation with the world. An understanding appreciation of literature means an understanding appreciation of the world, and it means nothing else. Not isolated and unconnected parts of life, but all of life, brought together and correlated in a synthetic map. The spirit of literature is unifying. It joins the candle and the star, and by the magic of an image shows that the beauty of the greater is in the less. And not content with the disclosure of beauty and the bringing together of all things whatever within its focus, it enforces a moral wisdom by the tracing everywhere of cause and effect. It consoles doubly by the revelation of unsuspected loveliness and by the proof that our lot is the common lot. It is the supreme cry of the discoverer, offering sympathy and asking for it in a single gesture. In attending a university extension lecture on the sources of Shakespeare's plots, or in studying the researches of George Saintsbury into the origins of English prosody, or in weighing the evidence for and against the assertion that Rousseau was a scoundrel, one is apt to forget what literature really is and is for. It is well to remind ourselves that literature is first and last a means of life, and that the enterprise of forming one's literary taste is an enterprise of learning how to best use this means of life. People who don't want to live, people who would sooner hibernate than feel intensely, will be wise to eschew literature. They had better, to quote from the finest passage in a fine poem, sit around and eat blackberries. The sight of a common bush afire with God might upset their nerves. I'm not sure there are any words in the English language I would rather I had written.